and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington, and we are live tonight with a lot of breaking news from around the world. We start in Germany. 6 Syrians seeking asylum were swept up in a massive anti-terror raid involving hundreds of police officers. Officials say they believe the men in their 20s had contacts with ISIS and had been casing potential targets just ahead of the opening of the holiday markets, possibly planning to use weapons or explosives in an attack. But just hours ago, the men were released. Authorities saying they didn't have concrete evidence they needed to hold them. And that's raising numerous questions tonight. Last year, 12 people were killed when an Islamist terrorist rammed a truck through a holiday crowd in Berlin. The State Department is warning Americans to exercise caution while traveling in Europe during the holidays because of the ongoing terror threat. And here at home, authorities are taking no chances, coast to coast. In Houston, officers are out in force at the international airport, as they are at LAX and across the West Coast. In New York, the NYPD says expect to see at least one cop on every single city block, and highly armed and trained emergency service officers in key areas throughout the city ahead of the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade. Police say currently there is not a credible threat against the parade, though an Islamic State English language posting last year described the parade as, quote, an excellent target. It was just a month ago that Sayfullo Saipov allegedly rammed a truck down a bike lane, killing 8 people in Lower Manhattan. Buck Sexton, former NYPD intelligence analyst and CIA veteran, joins us now. Buck, good to have you with us tonight.
Good to see you, Shannon.
Let's talk first about this situation in Germany, because the accounts that we've read so far say 500 officers, multiple cities, they sweep up these 6 young men, say they believe they had contacts with ISIS, say they believe they'd been casing potential public targets, and yet tonight they say we had to let them go. What do you make of that?
It's highly unusual that you would have arrests involving hundreds of officers across multiple cities in Germany, and in a matter of hours, the story from the authorities to the press went from these are ISIS members who are part of an active cell looking to do essentially a replay of the Christmas market attack last year in Germany to we are letting them go. It just doesn't add up, Shannon. All I can say for it is that given the high tensions right now, the stream of threat reporting, all the chatter out there on jihadist sites, I think that both here and abroad in places like Germany, there's just a high level of tension and anxiety and concern among law enforcement that are tasked with trying to protect people from a mass casualty attack during the holidays, which we know the Islamic State wants to pull off and has pulled off in the past.
Yeah, and they want us to think about it. We know that, too, because that's part of terror. They want us to be afraid and change our life patterns. I know that they think that if they instill fear in our society, it leads to underminings of our economy, of the very foundations and fabric of our society.
One of the big problems you deal with as an intelligence analyst, whether in law enforcement or on the federal side of things, is that you have to be constantly sifting out what is just chatter, what is threat reporting that is meant to throw you off, from what is a credible plot or a credible terrorist attempt to try and incur casualties. And that's also something we have to keep in mind right now, because given the streams of threat reporting coming in, all stuff that's being published out there on the open source about the different venues that ISIS would like their adherents, not even necessarily people with any direct ties to the group, to strike specifically over the holidays, because they know there's greater concentrations of people in the streets. There's also just the symbolic value of attacking any Western country, America included, obviously, during our biggest period of holidays. So they're trying to keep us on edge, which they do by putting out all these threats. But we also have to look at the threats as credible, because all it takes is one ISIS believer to get into a vehicle, as we know, and we could have a deadly incident on our hands. So law enforcement, look, they've got it here in New York. They've got it elsewhere in the country. They know what they're doing, and they're prepared for it. But they obviously have to maintain vigilance, and we have to keep an eye on some of these threats as they emerge.
Yeah, and of course, New York City, no mistaking that it's a target 24/7, 365. The mayor has addressed that growing threat and what's being done to try to beef things up. Here's what he said.
Because we understand we are dealing with a very challenging world. And so the amount of resources and personnel we put in has increased each year to make us safer.
So we understand there are sanitation trucks filled with sand blocking off important areas, sharpshooters on roofs there in New York, heavily armed police officers on every cop. They actually have portable radioactive detectors that they can use as well. What's the mood there like? Because, yes, it's a holiday festive season, but authorities have a huge job.
Well, in the case of New York, the NYPD Counterterrorism Division and Intelligence Division are among the best equipped to deal with these different threats and possibilities, which is good because obviously New York City is among the very top terrorist targets in the world. They're specifically looking, Shannon, right now at trying to at least make a vehicle attack during the holidays, a mass casualty vehicle attack, something along the lines of what happened in Nice, France on Bastille Day not long ago, and has happened other places in Europe and happened here in New York City, but a matter of weeks ago on a holiday, on Halloween Eve. So they're trying to put in place all the barriers and all the defensive measures that they can. But there is no perfect security, and vigilance, both from law enforcement and from Americans, everyday folks on the streets, is necessary at this time of year, given how badly our enemies want to hit us, specifically during the holidays.
They do. And we're going to keep digging on that Germany situation, try to get some more answers there. Buck, thank you very much, and have a great Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, Shannon.
All right, tonight, sexual harassment allegations against prominent lawmakers are piling up. It hasn't stopped. Ellison Barber standing by with the very latest. Good evening, Ellison.
Good evening, Shannon. Conyers' attorney now is not being subtle when it comes to the sexual harassment allegations he is facing. He says when it comes to people asking Conyers to resign, quote, that is not going to happen. The statement went on to say if people were required to resign over allegations, a lot of people would be out of work in this country, including many members of the House, Senate, and even the president. Earlier this week, BuzzFeed reported that Conyers, the longest serving member of the House, paid a former staffer over $27,000 after she claimed he fired her because she refused his sexual advances. Conyers confirmed the settlement but denied any wrongdoing. BuzzFeed then uncovered court documents where another former staffer accused the Democratic lawmaker of daily sexual advances, from comments to unwanted touching. The Ethics Committee opened an investigation. Today, a noted attorney told the Washington Post Conyers harassed and verbally abused her when she worked in his congressional office in the 90s. Some Democrats say Conyers needs to go.
My colleague, Mr. Conyers, used his own resources within his office to make this some sort of settlement instead of going through the official process. This concerns me greatly. I think the congressman needs to look at himself, and frankly, if I was in his place, I would leave.
At least one lawmaker defended him. Representative Jim Clyburn was quoted in the New York Times as saying, "You can't jump to conclusions with these types of things. For all I know, all of this could be made up." Clyburn later tweeted that the allegations are disturbing and the Ethics Committee should conduct a thorough investigation. As Conyers digs in his heels, a Republican congressman is apologizing after a nude photo of him surfaced online. Texas Representative Joe Barton says he was separated from his wife when he had, quote, sexual relationships with other mature adult women. A woman Barton reportedly sent explicit photos and videos to, secretly recorded a phone call with him in 2015 and shared it with the Washington Post. Barton reportedly confronted the woman over her communication with other women and her decision to share the explicit material. In the recorded call, the Post says Barton warns the woman against doing anything with the material that negatively affects his career. The congressman also tells the woman he'll go to Capitol Police and ask them to launch an investigation. She says it was an attempt to intimidate her. Barton says the call is evidence of a crime against him, and Capitol Police are investigating. On the other side of the Hill, Senator Al Franken is facing 2 new accusations of inappropriate sexual behavior. HuffPost interviewed 2 women who say Franken groped them during photo ops. One woman says Franken groped her at a 2007 event hosted by the Minnesota Women's Political Caucus. Then there's Senate hopeful Roy Moore. He faces sexual misconduct and sexual assault allegations, but of course has refused to step down. Now he'll be campaigning without one member of his team, Communications Director John Rogers. The campaign says Rogers resigned. In an email to Fox News, an advisor with the Moore campaign said they had to make a change because Rogers, quote, did not have the experience to deal with the press the last couple of weeks. Shannon?
All right, Ellison, it continues. Thank you so much. All right, while Republicans continue to take hits over their handling of Roy Moore, Democrats facing their own issues with these new allegations tonight against Minnesota Senator Al Franken and Michigan Congressman John Conyers, as Ellison explained. So does anyone in Washington have the moral high ground? Fox News politics editor Chris Direwalt is here. Do you have it? Do I have it?
Lord, no, I don't want it.
Okay, listen, there's plenty to go around on both sides of the aisle. This Barton thing is heating up as well. Where do we go from here?
Well, the Barton thing's just sad. It's different than the rest of it. And his claim about she was doing revenge porn, basically, is what we're talking about here, is his allegation. That's a different thing. There doesn't seem to be it may be improprietous, but it's just humiliating for him.
Icky.
And probably ends his career. But it's no real wrongdoing except for maybe on her part. But I tell you, for these Democrats, if they don't get serious about Franken and about Conyers, they're not going to be in a position to say anything about Roy Moore. You know, you would think that the Republicans would be, you want to talk about, it's actually a pretty good encapsulation of how bad the Democrats have been at contending with Republicans. You have this total disaster of a Senate nominee in Alabama. I mean, the worst, that the Republican, it hits it wrong in so many ways for the Republican parties, this potential disaster. But because Democrats, for various reasons, are unwilling to address, or so far, have been unwilling to address Franken and unwilling to address Conyers in the right ways, what are they going to say? And that's exactly what President Trump is exploiting when he goes out and puts sort of a half of a bro hug on Roy Moore, like, well, if you can have Franken and you can have Conyers, then we can have Roy Moore.
Yeah, and there's a split, obviously, within the Democrat Party. A couple of things here. We talked about, Ellison said earlier in the day, Congressman Clyburn, also a well-esteemed longtime member of Congress, said, you can't jump to conclusions with these types of things. For all I know, all of this could be made up. It sounded like later in the day he was trying to sort of backpedal a little bit on that. But from Congresswoman Kathleen Rice, a Democrat, she says, Representative John Conyers should resign. I've reviewed the allegations against him. They're as credible as they are repulsive. His lawyer says, no way. He says, if people were required to resign over allegations, a lot of people would be out of work in this country, including many members of the House, Senate, even the president. Congressman Conyers has no plans to resign.
Well, look, John Conyers doesn't have a right. That's not his seat. That's not Al Franken's seat. And in the case, certainly, of Franken, he can step aside for the good of the party, for the good of the country, for the good of Minnesota. I mean, look, when you have the members of the Minnesota Feminist Choir who are accusing you of groping, you're in a bad place. He can step aside, and another Democrat will fill that seat, and the party can move on. The world does not need Al Franken. Al Franken is not curing polio. He is one of 100 senators. No big deal. He can go on and do something else. The hubris, the arrogance that's attached to these lawmakers who are bringing harm to their parties, who are bringing harm to themselves because they selfishly believe they are important to this process, is a reflection of how the selfishness, the solipsism that infects and inhabits American politics prevents us from seeking the better good of the republic. It's all about them. It's never about everybody else.
You know that we're going to have to go get a thesaurus, a dictionary, whatever. I don't know. Does that start with a P or an S or a solid? Whatever. Yeah, we know what you mean. Okay, listen.
Solipsistic potatoes for Thanksgiving.
Sounds delicious.
It's very delicious.
You know what's also delicious? The Turkey Bowl Awards that you give out. Talk about those, because today was the day we got some of these, and you have some repeat offenders or winners, however you want to look at it.
No. These are the winners. These are the people who made it very easy for us this year.
Okay.
Includes people like Anthony Scaramucci, the people who the guy on Ted Cruz's Twitter handle who liked the wrong tweet. Just the people who, in a year that it has been very. Put it this way, we're enormously privileged to get to cover politics at this moment because we don't have to scrape for stories. We just open up the inbox and there they are. And some of the people who made it the best. And the top winner this year, Hillary Clinton, for worst book tour ever. And she is a back-to-back winner for 2 terrible book tours.
Well, and this one, like, she could not have planned that this whole thing was going to erupt, and it now reignites the conversation about her husband, and now Democrats actually turning on him and saying we never should have allowed him to get away with this, which is convenient to say 25 years later, but not good during a book tour.
Good advice for Hillary Clinton, though, about scandals and these things. If you want to ever rehabilitate your image, as my old daddy used to say, if you don't want to get a haircut, don't hang around in the barbershop. Might be a good time for her to get out of the barbershop.
I love his sayings, and yours too. And happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you and yours.
Have a good one. All right. We have just learned, by the way, there's going to be a big meeting at the White House next week. President Trump will meet with the big four congressional leaders Tuesday in the Oval Office. Comes as we've learned the Senate GOP might be one vote closer to getting approval of its version of tax reform. Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski now says she does support the controversial addition of repealing the Obamacare individual mandate as part of the tax package, but she's not exactly sure about the rest of the bill. So hold please on that. Meanwhile, the president is tweeting from his Mar-a-Lago resort, a.k.a. the Winter White House, diving right back into his tit-for-tat with LeVar Ball, the father of one of 3 UCLA basketball players arrested and jailed in China for shoplifting. Quote, it wasn't the White House. It wasn't the State Department. It wasn't Father LeVar's so-called people on the ground in China that got his son out of a long-term prison sentence. It was me. Too bad. LeVar is just a poor man's version of Don King, but without the hair. There's a second tweet to that, but we won't go there. All right. The president then revisited the NFL national anthem controversy, aiming this time not at the kneeling players, but at the league and leadership itself. Quote, the NFL is now thinking about a new idea, keeping teams in the locker room during the national anthem next season. That's almost as bad as kneeling. When will the highly paid commissioner finally get tough and smart? This issue is killing your league. More tweets to come, I'm sure. Coming up, we are on verdict watch in the trial of an illegal immigrant accused of murdering Kate Steinle. The jurors are in deliberations, but so far, you know what? The Senate is as well. That's got our next guest, a GOP congressman who backed Kate's law in the House, wondering what's taking the Senate so long. And we're going to check out Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's Turkey Day talking points. Democrats gearing up for Thanksgiving debate around the dinner table. Will you be talking politics? Stick around. Now that the FBI is involved in the investigation into the death of one Border Patrol agent and serious injuries to another, there are growing questions about exactly what happened. The Border Patrol has said that Agent Rogelio Martinez was attacked by migrants and possibly stoned to death. He was found at the bottom of a ditch. The FBI says that is one possible scenario. Another is that he might have fallen into the ditch. A border agent says there is no way 2 agents fell into the same ditch and got those injuries. Well, jurors in the case against Garcia Zarate, a homeless illegal immigrant deported multiple times and now accused of murdering Kate Steinle, headed home for the Thanksgiving holiday without reaching a verdict. It appears the jury's also still out for the Senate, trying to pass a measure, which is not even voted on, the measure named after Kate Steinle, Kate's law, that would stiffen penalties against previously deported illegal immigrants who commit crimes. The measure passed the House in June, but it's not even gone to a vote yet or been considered in the Senate. Joining us now, one of the backers of Kate's law, New York Congressman Lee Zeldin. Great to have you with us tonight, sir.
It's great to see you.
Okay, so by my accounting, this passed in the House June 29th. There were some GOP defectors, but you got at least 12 Democrat votes by my count. It was received in the Senate, which is controlled by the Republicans, on July 1st. What since then?
Well, it's really all about finding 8 Democrats who would be willing to vote for it. With the Senate rules requiring 60 votes, if you have all 52 Republicans in the Senate, you still need 8 Democratic senators. So I think that's that's been the main holdup over there, and really it's the right thing to do for more than 8 of these Democratic senators to come on board, because as we see in the case of Kate Steinle, but this happens all across the entire country, where people are removed from the country and then they come back sometimes multiple times, maybe multiple misdemeanors, felonies. They might do 30 months or 60 months or more in prison, and they should be held accountable. But actually what you have is a lot of Democrats who are going out of their way to protect these individuals. And that was the case that we have here in San Francisco, where instead of turning over an individual to the federal government for deportation proceedings, and instead they had a sanctuary city, and that led to a loss of one beautiful, young, talented life.
Well, I understand that you've experienced this with a constituent in your own congressional district. I mean, this is something we've heard these stories again and again about people who were here, many of them kicked out of the country multiple times. They come back. There's really, it appears, no disincentive for them to do that. But as you know, and as you said, you got to get at least 8 Democrats over in the Senate. Here's something that Senator Bob Menendez had to say earlier about Kate's law. He says, I will do whatever I can in order to stop them. These are only punitive in nature. They don't deal with the totality of the reality of our immigration challenge. And as a continuing part of the Republican saga that only looks at one element and looks at it in a way that is totally disproportionate. All right, so we're not going to count him as a possibility among the 8. But how do you respond?
Well, I mean, you have families that are getting torn apart. Every nation's backbone is its rule of law. Every nation's borders, it's really, if you don't have one, you don't really have a nation. And it's important for these Democratic senators who, and as Democratic mayors and other local town supervisors who, they look at these people coming as constituencies and they want to protect these families. And they're turning a blind eye to what we face on Long Island with the rise of MS-13. Fortunately, President Trump, the AG, they've been coming to Suffolk County, my home county, and I have loss of lives happening all of the time all across our island. And if you don't have the right policies in place, if you're not enforcing your nation's backbone and your rule of law, if you are turning a blind eye because you want more votes in your next election, lives are getting lost as a result of it. So it's a responsibility when you put your hand on the Bible and you take an oath to be a United States Senator, to be a United States a member of the House of Representatives, that when these votes are coming up, you should be going out of your way to be able to vote for, on behalf of Kate Steinle's family, for the family in my district where not too long ago someone who was deported, returned, and then is allegedly murdered one of my own constituents. This is the right thing to do for that family, and it's like they're blinded because they want to get, a gavel in their hand. They want to become a chairman. They want to get reelected. And they're ignoring all of the realities on the ground, and it's tearing apart families and communities. And the sanctuary cities, we provide federal tax dollars to all of these different local municipalities, and in some cases states, all across the country, and they're ignoring federal law, and we're still paying them. So we also need to better leverage the money that we're providing, the federal money, to help get the results that we need for those families, for those communities, for our law.
Yeah, and just yesterday, a federal judge out in California actually blocked the efforts by this administration to take sanctuary city funding away. That, no doubt, will wind its way through the courts as well. We'll keep an eye on this in the Senate, and possible they put it to a vote, to put everybody on the record about how they're voting on this, Republican and Democrat alike. Congressman Zeldin, thanks for making time for us just before your Thanksgiving break, and have a great one.
You got it. Thank you. You too.
All right, coming up, a brave defector risking everything for a chance at freedom. The incredible story and the stunning video. She was shot multiple times. How is he faring tonight? And will Uber customers be willing to forgive and forget? We're going to have the latest on that massive hack of your data and the years spent hiding that hack from you. Just a minute. Incredible video tonight out of the Korean Peninsula where a North Korean soldier risked his life desperately trying to get to freedom. Correspondent Benjamin Hall shares the unbelievable images and the rest of the story.
3 p.m. in North Korea, and a lone soldier is racing toward freedom. His dark green Jeep speeds down a road, passes a guard building, then crosses what was once called the Bridge of No Return. Soldiers realize that one of their comrades is defecting and race to stop him. But just yards from safety, the Jeep gets stuck. And when North Korean troops get close, the defector has no choice but to run for it. Around 40 shots are fired at close range, and 5 hit the man. But he keeps going. Finally, he falls, unmoving, in a pile of leaves. 40 minutes later, 2 South Korean soldiers crawl towards him and drag him to safety. The incredible video clearly shows North Korea violating the 1953 armistice, with one soldier even crossing into the south. And the UN command say they have now requested a meeting with the North's military to discuss the violations.
The key findings of the Special Investigation Team are that the KPA violated the armistice agreement by 1, firing weapons across the MDL, and 2, by actually crossing the MDL.
Doctors for the unidentified 24-year-old defector say he is alive and recovering, not only from the bullet wounds, but also from the terrible living conditions in the north. They say his body is riddled with parasites, unlike anything they've seen before. There are around 1,000 defections a year from the north, but this was only the 4th in 3 years to happen at the DMZ, and it was in a manner befitting a Cold War drama. His doctors also say he is now up and watching American movies like Transformer, even Bruce Almighty, and one can only imagine how strange and different the world must seem overnight after his incredibly lucky escape. In London, Benjamin Hall, Fox News.
North Korea's foreign minister in Cuba today meeting with his counterpart. The two nations strengthening ties as they both face increased tension with the U.S. The official trip comes on the heels of President Trump declaring North Korea a state sponsor of terrorism just this week. Cuba, as you know, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Tragedy tonight in the Western Pacific. A Navy transport plane taking passengers and cargo to an American aircraft carrier went down today, just a day before Thanksgiving. Most on board were rescued, but the search is on for 3 remaining. It is just the latest in what's been a horrible run of accidents involving the Navy's Japan-based 7th Fleet and military aviation in general. The White House late tonight announcing additional disaster aid for California. The president authorizing an increase in federal funding for California recovery efforts from last month's wildfires that devastated portions of wine country. Trump had been accused by California Governor Jerry Brown of ignoring the state's request for $7 billion in federal aid. Tonight, Uber admitting it failed to disclose the hacking of personal information of some 57 million customers and drivers. And Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt tells us the company may have paid a ransom to cover it all up.
A cascade of criticism is putting Uber under increasing pressure over the hacking incident and the cover-up.
They're creating even more damages. And in fact, they're playing with our privacy and our private information.
The New York Attorney General's office confirms it has opened an investigation, and the Federal Trade Commission says, quote, "We are closely evaluating the serious issues raised." 57 million Uber customers and drivers may have had their personal information stolen as a result of the hack. That information included names, home and email addresses, phone numbers, and in the case of drivers, their license information.
The liability of our data, that our credit card information, that our money is in their hands. They cannot just decide to take this breach and hide it behind the scenes, and then whatever it's convenient for them, it's actually to reveal it.
Uber's security chief at the time of the hack resigned recently, and a lawyer who reported to him was fired. Uber's CEO, Dara Khosrowshahi, said there's no evidence the stolen information has been used, possibly because of the $100,000 ransom Uber paid. And Khosrowshahi said in a statement, quote, "While I can't erase the past, I can commit on behalf of every Uber employee that we will learn from our mistakes." Uber is, of course, far from the first company this year to reveal a cyber breach. The clothing retailer Forever 21 also announced a hack this month. Hyatt Hotels and Sonic did so in October, Whole Foods and Equifax in September, and Chipotle back in May. But the attempted cover-up by Uber is what is likely to most infuriate regulators and could see the company facing fines in the millions of dollars worldwide. Uber says it will cooperate with all investigations. Shannon?
Jonathan, thank you. Coming up, do not get sick this holiday season. Of political debates at the dinner table. Tips for avoiding or winning should you choose to debate. That's next. And why is the Catholic Church having so much trouble finding new priests and nuns? We'll look into that coming up. Once a taboo subject, politics is now part of daily discourse. But is it good table talk at Thanksgiving? Well, some liberal groups have been sending out talking points to the masses, hoping to arm them for battle. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, for example, tweeting, quote, "Bring this chart to Thanksgiving dinner. It'll come in handy when that family member who always talks politics tells you the Republican tax bill helps the middle class." Well, we've decided to let our political wonks duke it out in front of a turkey dinner, so you do not have to unless you really want to. And that is possible tomorrow. Joining me now around our table tonight, Beverly Hallberg of District Media Group and Democratic strategist Al Motter. Great to have both of you with us.
Thank you.
And with our turkey display. So we can get a start on doing this at the turkey table. All right. A new poll out by PBS NPR asking, how do you feel about talking about politics around the table? 58% said they are dreading it. 31% said they are eager to get into it. And 11% said they're not sure. Al, how to proceed and keep the peace? Is it possible?
How about this? How about we just try to listen to each other and be respectful, and then people can talk? And
that sounds good in theory. I'm not sure that's always going to work.
Well, if it doesn't, you can always revert to your cocktails and your food.
Yes. Beverly, I think you're the one who said carbs over conflict.
Always carbs over conflict.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you feel like you need to say something, you're concerned about what somebody else says, ask for the mashed potatoes and it solves it. Because I think what this really comes down to, I thought it was funny that Senator Schumer thinks that you should come in with some kind of flow chart of the Republican tax plan. If somebody showed up to my house with a big chart, I would probably say that they have to go to to the kids' table, that we don't need a chart over Thanksgiving. I think that this should be a focus on enjoying the things, being thankful for things, and unfortunately politics can be very tricky, especially when we can't even bring up football anymore without a political discussion.
I mean, that football also gets, that can get to fighting words too. Also, okay, so GQ had this headline. They said, your civic duty, it's your civic duty to ruin Thanksgiving by bringing up Trump. The subheader on that was, consider making life hell for your relatives. Ow.
I mean, it sounds like a scene out of American Horror Story, the latest season, where all they did is cover people who are angry about losing the election and voted for Jill Stein. I mean, that's kind of crazy, right? I mean, we don't need to ruin people Thanksgiving. We already had a war on Christmas, so to speak.
So let's not have one on Thanksgiving, too.
Turkey Day, too.
And I've heard a little bit of advice. I wonder what you guys think about this, is that it's better not to talk about names. Like, don't talk about Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, anybody, Bill Clinton, whoever. It's better to talk about policies and ideas, Beverly.
Yeah, I would say, especially when you get into different individuals, even Trump right now, he tweets all the time. There are a lot of things that people could talk about. I think it's focusing even on the policy issues. What's an area that you can agree on? So I would even say when it comes to taxes, which Chuck Schumer thinks we should talk about at Thanksgiving, if you could focus on the fact that we want small businesses to thrive, how do we do that? Maybe you and I disagree on how we get there, but agree on some type of common ground. That can be a good place to start, and always with a proper tone. It's when you get worked up that's where it gets into a lot of issues.
And there are other issues, too, that a lot of people agree on, like terrorism. That's bad. We want to get the bad guys. I mean, that's something that should unite Americans, right? I mean, there are some other ideas that we can have positive conversations about.
Absolutely. I mean, look, with my Democratic friends and President Trump, I like to try to tell them, don't get so annoyed at all the tweets. Like, what he says doesn't matter as much as you think it does. People are wrapped up in this concept that he says all this stuff and it's disruptive and it's terrible, but that's what he is. That's who he is. So let's not worry about that. Let's have a nice meal. If we want to talk about policies, as Beverly said, let's do that. But we can do it and see a little fun in it, too. I mean, a lot of the stuff he does is kind of amusing, to be honest.
Yeah, for a lot of people, they get either you get very worked up about it or you get very upset. There was another informal survey. We don't really like to call it a poll, but this was kind of fun. Which issue is most likely to start an argument at your table? Number one on the list by a mile was the president. Surprised, Beverly?
Not surprised at all, because he tweets about most things. Yeah. And again, the football issue. I mean, people are excited to watch football on Thanksgiving. That's something he's talked a lot about. He even had a tweet yesterday about whether or not he thinks the players should be in the locker room during the national anthem. So I find it interesting. The Vice is really twofold. There's either have this provocative approach where you bring up issues at the Thanksgiving table, or you do what Planned Parenthood suggested. They had a suggestion, which was find a safe space when you go home. So not just college campuses anymore. You have to find a safe space
even
when you go. Even in your house. So they said enlist in allies like other family and friends. Bring someone with you who's on your side. Or they went to this extreme, don't go at all if you feel like you may not be safe.
Beanbags for everybody, right?
Exactly.
Hey, listen, turkey, it's got the tryptophan. That knocks everybody out at some point, and enough pie, and that will keep everyone happy. So, Alan, Beverly, have great Thanksgivings, both of you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks for having
with
us.
us.
Happy Thanksgiving.
All right, coming up, we're going to get an update on all the holiday travel, the situations from sea to shining sea. It's busy out there. And cops have relied on canines for protection, but now this is about puppies. We're going to tell you what they're up to at airports near you in just a minute. If you are on the roads, aboard a plane or on a train, you've got plenty of company tonight. President Trump tweeted out not long ago, 51 million Americans to travel this weekend, highest number in 12 years, adding, traffic in airports are running very smoothly. By the way, tweet us and let us know if they're not where you are. Senior correspondent Mike Tobin joins us from O'Hare Airport in Chicago with an update on the situation out there.
Hello, Shannon. Day one of what should be a record-setting holiday travel weekend, and it looks like we're through the worst of the period or through the heaviest part of it without any significant mess. According to the website FlightAware, things are moving along relatively smoothly. Do not let the presence of armed security alarm you. Here in Chicago, we saw SWAT officers with rifles, with body armor. That is not due to a specific threat. Rather, it is the random nature of the threat that is the reality of the world in which we now live. The big hang-up will be getting through the security checkpoint. The TSA recently did poorly in a Inspector General audit, and you get punished for their poor grade. If you're traveling with anything larger than a cell phone in your carry-on, it probably has to come out, and that will slow down the line. But 28.5 million of you are going over the river and over the woods to get to grandmother's house. So far, it looks like things are moving along. A little bit of bad weather causing some delays. I can't promise you that the entire weekend will be smooth. So far, so good. The heaviest day will be Sunday. Shannon, back to you.
Always a tough day. Mike Tobin, thank you. Time now for Night Court. We pass no judgment on these stories, but present them to you, the jury, for your consideration. If all the holiday travel is stressing you out, from the TSA pat downs to the long lines and delays, well, authorities think they have something that might help you out. At airports across the country tonight, you may have noticed puppies. According to an official from Los Angeles International Airport, they are an important part of ramped up holiday staffing.
We're going to have increased traffic officers to help move traffic along hopefully smoothly. We're going to have increased people helping in the terminals. People have questions where they're going to get to their gates. You might be able to find some of our puppies out throughout the terminals. We've got pets unstressing passengers. If you see someone with a little dog with a red vest, go ahead and pet it and help your travels along.
I fully endorse that idea. All right, now to more controversial matters. Apple's first vice president of diversity and inclusion is being forced out of the company, some say, for being politically incorrect. At a One Young World Summit recently, Denise Young said 12 white, blue-eyed blonde men in a room are going to be diverse because they're going to bring different life experience and perspective to the conversation. I get frustrated when the term diversity is tagged to people of color, women, or LGBT. Well, Apple reacted to the backlash from those remarks by announcing that Young, an African-American woman, is leaving. A 6-year-old Wisconsin kindergartner bagged her first 6-point buck this week, one of the first children to do so after the state nixed its minimum hunting age. Tyler Harris bought his daughter Lexi a youth rifle. He'd been taking her, said, since she was 3. He said she was shaking when she pulled the trigger, and then when they found the deer, she said, "I'm not gutting it because that's gross." So he did it. Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker signed a new law on November 12th that allows anyone of any age to participate in a mentored hunt, and the mentor and the student are each allowed to carry their own weapon. Coming up, a focus on faith and the difficulty in finding those who believe enough to devote themselves to a lifetime in service to the church. Following a bit of breaking news potentially out in Seattle, we want to update you on this. You're looking live at the airport there. We're told that the police officers there on scene are investigating a suspicious item. This is in the north end of the ticketing level. Right now, a small area is closed off, including a security checkpoint. If you're traveling through there, we're told it's security checkpoint 5. We're told in the meantime that areas you can see drivers can still come through. Ticket counters remain open, but police on site, they're investigating a suspicious item at SeaTac in Seattle. If you're traveling, keep abreast of that, and we'll keep you updated as we know more. Tonight, a closer look at the major shortfall in men and women who want to serve as priests and sisters in the Catholic Church. Religion correspondent Lauren Green tells us what accounts for the changes and what the numbers mean.
32-year-old Brendan Coffey is a walking embodiment of what has become a rare exception for the Catholic Church, a millennial choosing the priesthood.
The life of a Jesuit is countercultural. By today's standards, not a lot of people are getting in line for poverty, chastity, and obedience. For me, it was falling in love with a commitment to service, a commitment to promoting a God who is deeply in love with his creation.
Over the last 5 decades, the Catholic Church in the United States has seen a steady decline in the number of priests and sisters, according to Georgetown University's Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, or CARA. In 1965, there were nearly 59,000 priests in the U.S. and nearly 180,000 religious sisters. In 2016, the numbers had dwindled to just over 37,000 priests and just over 47,000 sisters. The decline in sisters is more significant because the number entering were much higher than priests, particularly after World War II.
There are so many who are now in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and so the steep decline each year is really accountable mainly to those who are dying and the smaller numbers who are entering.
The lack of sisters is having an economic impact on Catholic schools. Today, the schools must employ more lay teachers at higher wages. That forces tuitions to rise and fewer who can afford it.
The smaller number engaged with students or young people does kind of have a natural social consequence.
Brendan is one of 28 Jesuits living and studying at Fordham University who've chosen a life of priestly service.
From the experience of the guys in this house, we are living good, happy lives. And I wish more people could experience that.
While religious vocations are down in the U.S., a Georgetown University study shows there are 26 million more Catholics across America today than there were in 1965. Shannon?
Lauren Green, thank you so much. And by the way, we wish you the very best Thanksgiving. Hope you'll enjoy it, celebrating with people that you love. Most watched, most trusted, and most grateful that you spent the evening with us. Good night from Washington. I'm Shannon Bream.